That's looking more like it. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name's Joe Buskins. This is our family's boat shop, and we are in episode 12 of our project boat rebuild. Now, if you've been following along, we've been working on the console. We've done demolition on the transom. And in our previous episode, we actually got the first layer of our 26-pound density, 3/4 inch thick Coosa board installed on the transom. Now, if you're not familiar with Coosa, it's actually made in the state of Alabama, down in the southeast. It is a rot-proof, lightweight, very high-strength replacement for marine plywood. And we've been really working on shaping and contouring our second piece since the last episode. So this is going to be 2 layers of 3/4 inch thick, 26-pound density, which is very common for transom replacements. Now, you could absolutely use marine plywood if you wanted to, and there are some other cores out there that are available, but I've had really good success with Coosa, and we've used it extensively, even like when we were building our big 29-footer there that we use in our summertime charter business. Now, you can see here, there's that second layer of the Coosa that we can peel right off of there. And I wanted to show, last night when we glassed this, we've got all the weep holes where the resin and the air was able to vent out, but we did have some little runs and drips. And I like to use a scraper that's a straight bladed. You can get that in the paint section at Home Depot, Lowe's, or I'll put a link to it in our video's description below. And you can actually use that to scrape any runs or drips. And you can see we've already gone all the way around the transom. We've done some sanding here so that we don't have any burrs or any edges. And that's going to be very important to be sure that your second piece of Coosa really mates up nice and flat to your first piece of Coosa board. I am going to go ahead and do a little bit of priming before we move forward. That's pretty important as far as staging and getting everything ready. I'm going to mix up just about a third of a quart or so. Last night we were going at around 12 cc's per quart, so I want this to kick along pretty fast, so we're going to go about 5 cc's for that amount. That's going to be what we call a little spicy, or on the hot side, but that is okay because today we are in the low 60s, which generally that's going to be one of your lower thresholds for doing this kind of work, especially with vinyl esters and polyesters. So again, about 100 rotations is kind of a general guideline, and about every 25 or 30, I like to pause and scrape the edges real nice. And I want to be sure to get some resin all up in those edges and around the perimeter. And we're also going to use some of this resin to come back, and anywhere where the holes were not filled with resin, we will run. I hope you folks at home can see that. We're allowing that resin to run back into those holes there, and be sure we've got a 100% bond on our core. I've found that kind of brushing around it and then using the brush to kind of push it, it'll kind of just run in there, run behind, get a good seal or bond that way. Priming is very important, even with the Coosa, in my opinion. Now is a good time to thank everybody for tuning in. I appreciate y'all so much. Channel has been growing all year, and you folks that are watching, we've noticed an interesting metric. There's a lot of people watching that aren't subscribed to the channel. Totally free to hit that little button there if you're enjoying the content that we're putting together for you folks at home. Share some of our family's boat building history and knowledge. My father, he started this business back in the 60s, building plywood boats, as a matter of fact. That was kind of his, he used cypress and juniper frame and marine ply. And then he had a chance to start experimenting a little bit with fiberglass. Back when he was in the Air Force, he built a little skiff in fiberglass, the exterior of it. And I grew up mostly around the fiberglass side of things, but we've built some little plywood and epoxy stitching glue style skiffs in the past, and we may even build some again in the future. Don't know if you folks at home would be interested in seeing. I kind of floated that idea out there back a few months ago. Maybe building a little stitching glue skiff as a project here in the boat shop. Now I've got a little bit of resin left over there after priming. I think what I might do is actually make a little vinyl ester filler. I was kind of inclined to go with some polyester, but I've got some putty left, and it's a simple matter of adding some colloidal silica. Now this is not good to breathe, folks, so you do not want to breathe this. You want to have a mask on and be in an open air condition if you're going to be using it. We're going with some 1/4 inch milled fibers. That's going to add some strength to our putty. You know, it's amazing how many factory built boats I've seen that don't have any putty around the perimeter. This boat did not. When we pulled the core out of it, you want to stir that real gently at first. You can see that starting to thicken. We do not want that good vinyl ester resin to go to waste. Alright, you don't want to add too much filler at once because you can't take it back out. You can always add more, but you can't take it out. It's kind of like adding salt to your cooking. Have you guys ever added too much salt? You can't take it out, so it's probably better to under thicken it and then adjust as needed. That's looking more like it. That's the kind of stuff we're looking for. All right, and one thing we've had some questions about, folks, is our little mixing boards. That is actually some sign material that was on one of our rental boats at one time. We had some pontoon boats, so it's sign material. You should be able to pick that up at your local, maybe, sign shop. We're going to take a little bit of this, and there's a few areas where there's some little gaps and whatnot. Never a bad idea to tighten everything up if you have a chance. Less chance of things moving around. There's a little gap here on top. You can come in there and fill that. And again, you can change the consistencies. This is a little on the thin side, but I kind of switched gears a little bit on what I wanted to use. I didn't know I was going to have a little bit of resin left over there. Good idea to wear a Tyvek suit doing this kind of stuff too, because you're always, seems like you're always leaning over there. Very important to get plenty of resin on the core you're bonding in, whether it be vinyl ester, polyester, epoxy. I know a lot of folks choose to use epoxy, and that's completely all right. If you want to use epoxy, there's nothing wrong with it. Grew up in the shop mostly using polyester. That is what most production boats are going to be built out of, is going to be polyester resin. If you're ever curious, unless you've got a very high-end lightweight boat, specialty craft of some kind, it's almost guaranteed that it is going to be made out of polyester resin. I use my roller there to clean out the inside of my mixing container. Now we've already primed that and pre-coated it, and I've got some pieces of mat here. Generally 2 pieces of mat is going to be just fine for bonding your Coosa together. Coosa is going to be a pretty nice smooth surface that's gonna work well. When you got the original transom, a lot of times you got a lot of irregularities there, and sometimes you need a little more material to soak up some of those irregularities. It is nice to have a helper when you're doing this, for sure. Call in a favor if you can. Got some buddies or some friends. Now, y'all may have seen me use this little trick in our last episode, but a little fin roller or grooved roller. One of the tricks of the trade there, you'll see it'll really take out a lot of the air that's in your fiberglass. That is very important. You want a good resin-rich layer of glass bonding these two pieces together. It's good enough for there. Back in the acetone bucket. That's one of the secrets. And then we're going to get our second piece of CSM. That is 1 ounce CSM, by the way. I know it can be a little confusing as far as what sizes you might want to use. There's 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce, 1.5 ounces, 2 ounce. But I've always leaned toward or preferred the 1 ounce personally. I'd rather apply 2 layers of 1 ounce in a lot of cases than 1 layer of the 2 ounce. The 2 ounce can be a little tricky to wet out. It can be a little challenging. Love to know what kind of projects you folks at home are working on as well. It's interesting to know how many folks we got out there that are sailboat enthusiasts or powerboat fishermen, folks that just enjoy different aspects of boating, or even we've been having a surprising number of folks that are in the RV world. A lot of the stuff that we're doing might be applicable if you've got an RV, doing some Gelcoat repair to that, or even using the Coosa board as a plywood replacement. I've got a buddy of mine that has a RV repair business. Mike, if you're watching, I'm talking about you, man. Yeah, and he's interested in using some Coosa board with RV repair and getting away from plywood in certain applications and going with the Coosa, a rot-free alternative. You want to have plenty of resin though when you're using this. Now again, as I mentioned in the last episode, and if you're just tuning in and missed that one, we got several videos leading up to this one as far as prep and getting ready to do this. But you could use a putty or a filler, a thickened filler, to do the whole thing. And I know that's real common with epoxy, is to make a thickened putty of sorts and use that as your glue. But I've always preferred to use actual fiberglass if possible. Feel like you got a stronger product. Right, back to our little fin roller. You can see it changing the color, working that air. It's going to get darker, which is what you want. Practice makes perfect. You might want to start with something small if you've never done any fiberglass work. I've been doing it my whole entire life. Grew up in this boat shop. Happy to share what I know. We're talking about this the other day, and I mentioned in previous episodes that we're losing a lot of our trade people and craft people, and a lot of folks want to learn how to fix their own stuff, save some money, save some time, or even finding somebody that can or will do this kind of work anymore. It's just getting hard to find anybody that knows how to do this kind of stuff or is willing to do it. So what I'm doing right now, folks, is I'm really loading up the roller, putting a good wet coat on there after I've gone over it with our bubble buster, you can, a little trick I've learned is soak up as much resin as you can, and sometimes it's hard to get it to transfer to the piece with the roller. The roller just kind of wants to keep picking it up and moving it around, so you can scrape some of that resin out. You want to be sure, if you're in your good garage floor, shop floor, you may want to put some masking paper or something underneath. Here, our old boat shop is kind of used to this kind of stuff dripping, and that allows me to take the brush and kind of move that around. The brush does a little better job of just moving it without picking it up and holding it. If you folks want to see how we worked with Coosa when we were building our 29, you can go back on the channel, and we've got a full series of videos documenting the build of our 29 that we use in our charter business. That has a lot of good info in there as well. Oh, all right. catch my breath a little bit. All right, so we are ready to transfer this Coosa, and we've already adjusted our clamps that we use for holding this, and I've got some marks that I put here on the Coosa itself. Now sometimes what we'll do is just use some little speed clamps, but it can be squirmy. If y'all will notice, it wants to slip and slide a little bit sometimes. And a trick I've learned, occasionally you've got to run a few 1.25 inch. Those are some 1.25 inch screws, and I had them in there previously. I already ran them in, kind of did a dry. They should go right back in the same hole. You notice this one, I've got it circled there. That was one that we had. That's one of the tricks to this, is having some screws. Again, this one here that's circled, and that just makes sure it goes back exactly in the same spot as you had it originally. But you have to dry fit this prior, and that's what we did. We had this piece on here, and we ran some screws and everything through it, and we were able to do a dry fit. I'm going to go ahead and run a couple more in these extremities down here. One right there. Go ahead and pull that. And I'll tell you folks, we don't do transom replacements every day. I've done a bunch of them in my life, but sometimes my dad used to say his forgettery works better than his memory. Sometimes you're like, I know this stuff, but if you haven't done it in a minute, sometimes it's like, oh yeah. So hopefully the stuff we're showing you folks at home will save you some trouble and heartache, because there's definitely things to be learned and little techniques to be improved upon. All right, that's most of them there. I circled the ones that are screws, and I X'd the ones that are going to be our clamps. Okie dokie. Feel a little better just having it. Now we got a little bit of resin running off there, our edges. Sometimes what you can do is run a piece of tape and create a little barrier or dam that keeps the resin from just running down the back of the boat. That should help control it a little bit. This boat is not super high end. All right, and I've staged my clamps. I know exactly which one goes in which area. This one was, you can see my little circles with X's there. I like to start from the middle and work my way out. There we go. Again, hopefully folks can see these little X marks the spot on my, and it doesn't have to be like exactly. Although we try to keep a pretty high standard here. Sometimes trying to achieve perfection will make you nuts, and it'll keep you from ever doing something like this. We don't want that. Okay, 2. Very important to get some clamping pressure on this before the resin starts to kick, or else you're going to have a problem. Coming through. So here we go. We got a little ratchet set up. We're just going to start adding a little bit of pressure, just a couple turns at a time. You don't have to winch down on this and go crazy, but you want all these bolts making a little bit of contact, and we're looking for just a little bit of resin to start working its way out. And you can see that's already happening. Maybe my cameraman can pick up. Starting to see some resin run out of some of these holes as you put a little pressure. And honestly, once you get some squeeze out, that's all you need. You don't have to go crazy. And again, we talked about the benefits of vinyl ester in the last episode. If you're not familiar with it, I've got a resin selection video as well, but it kind of gives you a lot of the strength and waterproofing and bonding ability that epoxy has, but it's going to be less expensive. It doesn't produce an amine blush. It's completely compatible with Gelcoat, and it just uses a catalyst like the MEKP, which is the same as we use with polyester. And it is nice to have some help. I can't overemphasize that. I would call in your buddies if you're doing this. Have two or three people available, even if possible. Trying to mix the resin, cut the glass, fit the pieces. It can be, just because I'm doing it, I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing it yourself. If you got some help, please, tap into that for sure. And a lot of times what I will do is try to use that brush and maybe do a little bit of dabbing. This is just going to have to stand proud. This material that's kind of there on the edges, I'm going to let that cure, and then we will trim that. A lot of times I will take the brush and try to draw up or clean up. Maybe my cameraman can circle around. There we go. Try to clean up some of these runs we got here. We've given this vinyl ester, probably about 2 hours or so. We did have to employ a couple of tricks. We used our 1,000-watt halogen lamps, and we used a little Wagner heat source there to kind of warm this up. We've also come along and we've added some putty or filler and closed up these gaps. And we just loosened up all of our clamps. We backed our screws off. And at this point, we're okay to go ahead and pull our clamps here. And I want to go ahead and sand this putty and some of these little drips and runs, but that is really firmed up nice. And the transom's really starting to come together. We're trying to really expedite this thing, folks. There's a lot of steps here, and try to document all the important ones. But if we include everything, the videos get crazy long, and that's kind of one of the things about YouTube's not making the videos too long. Now you can see here where we use that piece of tape to kind of create that little dam, which works really good. And then we've got a few of these fasteners we're going to go ahead and pull out of here. Now, you theoretically could leave stainless steel fasteners in if you wanted to, not really hurting anything, but unless they don't want to come out or they're sticking up proud, you do have to kind of catch them before they get really, that one, see, that one got some resin in it. That one may have to stay there. That's okay. When we built the stringers for our 29, it's 2 layers of laminated Coosa, and when we glued them all together, we just left the screws in there, and that seems to work just fine. We've been doing that for years. You get a mechanical bond and a chemical bond there. There we go. All right, well, I think y'all get the idea. I'm gonna go ahead and finish backing these out, and we're gonna pick up our fest tool, and we're gonna clean up these edges a little bit before this gets too difficult to sand.